Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome everyone. Sufi Ibrahim Krebs's YouTube channel. I mustn't repeat my name too much because then I will be accused of a lack of humility and narcissism and who knows what else. But today's session is going to be about humility. One of the great qualities of true spiritual people. And it's in verse. You know, when you study the Arabic language, they often do antonyms, opposites. It's a good way of learning vocabulary. So what is the opposite of humility? Hadi?
Pride.
Pride, or sometimes arrogance. Yes. Okay, and I like to refer back to the Arabic words because the Arabic words are onomatopoeias. That is, the sound of the word indicates the meaning. So humility is takabur. Pride is takabur or mutakabir, for even more pride. Takabur. You can tell it. It's from kabara, and kabara means to get big. So if one is into inflating oneself, it's takabir or mutakabir. Okay, you can hear it in the word. But Kushairi, who we'll be talking about, it seems to accent, that's good for all of us, the positive qualities, and the positive qualities that are the opposite of pride are humility and submissiveness, and the Arabic words are khushu and tawadu. Okay. Tawadu comes from wada'a, the three-letter root, and wada'a means to put down. So essentially you're putting yourself down, but not in a self-debasing way, in a proper way. And khushu, so tawadu, you can hear it in the word, n'est-ce pas? And he's not sure. Okay, and khushu is the other word related to modesty, humility, submissiveness, khushu and tawadu. Okay. But one of the things we have to be careful about in all of this is hypocrisy. So we can have this pseudo-humility, which isn't really humility, but is a form of arrogance. You know, I remember, I think I saw this quite a bit, and I'm not accusing them as a movement, but in the tabligh, the way they enter into their prayer, you know, they go, you watch them go like this, Allahu Akbar, and then, you know, and then they're just kind of contracting all the way through just to show how much hushua they have. You know, no. Okay. You don't have to exaggerate what your actual state is. And actually, you can't do it with your body, humility. It's an inner state. And you can't, in a way, you can't pretend. You can pretend, but it's hypocrisy. And it's not easy to attain. Real humility is not easy to attain, and it's not self-abasement either. Okay. So when I think of false humility, I think of my favorite Arabic joke about, maybe I've told it before in these tapes, but it's worth repeating. So they're in a mosque, there are three people. The imam, the muezzin, and the caretaker. I don't know what the Arabic word is for that. Maybe khidma or something like that. Khadim. But the caretaker. Okay? And so the imam is speaking to the muezzin. The imam is the one who leads the prayer. The muezzin is the one who calls to the prayer. And so the imam is speaking to the muezzin and saying, I am nothing. You know, total humility. I am nothing compared to the Holy Prophet and compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am nothing. And the Muazzin responds to him, now that I think about it, me too, I'm nothing. I'm like the dust at the feet of the Prophet, or I'm nothing compared to Allah. The caretaker is listening to this whole conversation, comes into the mosque and he says, me too, I'm nothing also, just like you guys. And the Imam looks at the Muazzin and says, look who thinks he's nothing. So this is called false humility. And I've seen it in many forms. Another common form, I won't mention the people involved, but some muqaddams of a big sheikh. And the muqaddim comes in, or the khalif, call him what you want, and he says, oh, sheikh, you are the most, I am nothing, I am not even worthy of sitting at your feet. And then the sheikh, I watch carefully, because I've seen these things a few times, and the sheikh gives him some direction, some instruction, some recommendation, and he goes off and does the opposite. I am nothing, O sheikh. But what the sheikh says has no worth. His mind productions, his nafs takes over. Okay, this is also false humility. So we're not looking for that kind of humility.
He was nothing, but not in the way he meant.
Yeah, anyway, yeah. Allahu Akbar. Okay, so may Allah protect us from this false humility and may protect us from our own personal pride. Now, it's hard to avoid pride. It's not an easy thing, especially if you're good at something, and people end up doing a lot of what they're good at. So if they're an athlete, if they're naturally born athlete, then they're going to feel proud of their athleticism most of the time. So they've learned how to keep it hidden because they probably have agents who tell them not to say it too loud, but you can see their pride sometimes in their step or in their way. Muhammad Ali, for example, the great boxer, who was also probably a wali. He was a great spiritual man as well. And he developed Parkinsonism after his boxing career. And he eventually said, Allah sent me this illness. Why? Because I was too proud. I used to say, I am the greatest. There are a lot of people who say that. I am the greatest. And he said, and that was wrong. Because Allah is the greatest. I'm not the greatest. So be careful when you get into that situation, not to become terribly proud. Now, I had my own personal experience, now I'm talking about it, I'm remembering. At school, I was very good at school, both at mathematics and at literature and memorizing and stuff, but I was very weak in music. I have my father's tin ear. And my parents, may their soul rest in peace, especially my mother, she didn't have any idea of the limitations, especially relative to her children, so she didn't get it. So she sent me to one of the best schools of music, the Conservatoire de Musique de Québec. They had musical geniuses there, people who had international reputations after that for opera, for piano and everything. And I was okay. I was studying saxophone. I was good tactically. I was great, best student in the history of music, because that was an intellectual subject. But when it came to music, I couldn't hear a perfect fifth in the dictate classes. I couldn't sing a perfect fifth in the solfège classes. And so I felt like a complete moron. I have, let's say, musical learning difficulty. And I remember my solfège teacher was a solfège. Yeah, the dictate teacher was a lovely blind man, and he was very patient with me. But my solfège teacher was a little bit full of himself. He was a world-class pianist, and he couldn't believe that I couldn't sing the perfect fifth or the perfect third or whatever. And he said, "What's the matter with you, Joel? Are you some kind of idiot?" He was really not very diplomatic. I forget his name, but I said to him, let's call him Jean-Pierre. He wasn't French-Canadian, but let's call him Jean-Pierre. I don't remember his name. And I said to him, how did you do in your high school leaving exam, by the way? Because I knew where my strength was. You see how your pride can get in your way. I said, how did you do in your high school leaving exam? John was his name. John McKay, I think. And he said, oh, I got 79. I said, I'm going to beat you by at least 10%. And probably more. So he said, oh, you're kidding, never. Well, time went on. We did our final exams. I'm not bragging here. I just want to tell you the story. So I was in the top of the students in the province, and I got 92, I think. Not quite Jack Greenblatt, but almost. And and it was published in the local Montreal newspapers, because that's what they did then. The top students with their pictures were published. And I got a call from Paris. He was in the hospital in Paris, and he saw the Gazette newspaper. I don't know, it must have been from the French embassy or so, the Canadian embassy in France. And he called me up long distance and said, I'm so sorry about the way I treated you in the music class. You are a smart guy. You know? But my musical talent is definitely not one of my attributes. So we have to be careful. And the law gives us all strengths and weaknesses. And we like to think about our strengths and forget about our weaknesses, but the weaknesses are there too. And the weaknesses are to teach us humility on some level. So I was never quite the same after that music class. I knew I wasn't, because my mother had an inflated idea of what her children and what I could do, but it wasn't true. I have lots of limitations. Anyway, so pride is something we all have to deal with, and Christianity considers it the most important sin. In Islam, it's more shirk or making partners with Allah. In Buddhism, it's ignorance. But the Christians got this one right. Pride is the major fault of the human being. And in fact, we descended, in Christian theology, we descended to the earth because of our pride. Okay, it's a part of our original sin. Well, Kushairi, I love this book, and we're going to be covering various qualities. Okay, so we're going to try to get positive now. After the politics, there'll be more politics, by the way, for those of you who are stuck on politics, but they're going to be in the blog. Okay, SufiPilgrimsProgress.com. I'll be writing about Islamism and political stuff. But I'm going to try to keep these videos to the spiritual aspect, to the positive aspect. And so the positive aspect here is humility. Okay. So we're going to read a little bit about. Now, Kushairi was a great scholar and a mystic and a theologian. He had a lot of different qualities. And I would recommend anyone who's interested in Sufism to obtain this book, the Risala, which means the letters, I believe, and the Principles of Sufism. Okay. I used to teach this book, actually, believe it or not, at the mosque, at one of the Pakistani mosques. They'd ask me to come in, and each week we cover a different chapter, because these are very valuable lessons. So let's get back to see what Kushairi. Now, Kushairi was a student of Dakak, who is another great Sufi. And basically what this book is a compendium of Sufi sayings around various themes. And here we're covering mostly themes of virtue, I believe. So this one is about tawadu and khushua. Okay, humility, submissiveness. So we start with a hadith of the Prophet from Abdullah bin Masud, one of the great Sahabas. And the Prophet said, no one in whose heart is a grain of pride will enter the garden, will enter into paradise. and no one in whose heart is a grain of faith will enter the fire. Okay. So the first part, we have to try to eliminate this excessive pride because it will prevent us. And who is the poster child of pride?
Donald Trump?
Better than Donald Trump. Shaitan.
Right.
Okay? Satan. Iblis. The devil. God said, well, I want you to surrender to man. I want you to bow down to man. And he said, no way. I'm smarter than him. I know more than him. I pray more than him. I've been around more than him. There's no way I'm going to surrender to Adam. Okay? So that was the iconic, if you want, picture of pride. Even though God had said it and he knows very well that God doesn't speak, that God doesn't make mistakes, his pride still wouldn't let him surrender to this man. To man, generally. No one in whose heart is a grain of pride, no one in whose heart is a grain of pride will enter the garden. Okay, so that's pretty serious stuff. And it's not easy. So watch yourself. Be careful, because the same pride of Muhammad Ali, I'm the greatest, can enter in our lives, especially if we're good in something. Another couple of things that bring up pride a lot are
money,
being wealthy. People who are wealthy, if they haven't inherited it, which is a whole other problem, the trust babies, but if they haven't inherited and they made the money, often people like that are very arrogant about their money. Oh yes, I worked hard for this and I was very intelligent in my decisions and therefore I deserve this and I'm good. I'm great. I have all this money and people listen to me and etc. So, two things that probably bring up pride more than anything else, and a third thing, okay, are having money, and then there's having good health. People in good health think, oh, I'm good, I don't have any major illness and stuff. But be careful, because Allah can send you at any point some illness, an accident, a virus, a bacteria, and your life can take a complete turn for the worse because of a health problem. So if you happen to have the niyamat, the gift of good health, be thankful to your Lord, because it can be taken away in an instant. Doesn't take a lot. You don't have to be in a war situation to be at risk. You can walk outside your door and a car out of control can hit you by mistake, supposedly mistake. So we're very weak creatures and our bodies are very vulnerable. The slightest thing. I had a patient a long time ago. I haven't thought about this in a while. They were from France and her husband was an athletic type. And he didn't know his limitations, and he certainly didn't know Canada. He went out to do cross-country skiing on a minus 30-degree day, and he didn't think twice about it. And he ended up in the hospital with frozen toes, frostbite, but it was worse than frostbite. And he almost lost all his toes. He might have lost one or two, and he had pain in his feet ever since then. Okay, that's our state. That's the human state. Just some cold weather, gone. Some hot weather, you get malaria, you can be sick for the rest of your life also. So there's no reason for us to be proud of this human condition. Oh yeah, I was thinking, what's the third one? The third one, you're going to laugh at this, is becoming a doctor. A lot of people have noticed they have friends who wanted to go to medical school. Some didn't get in. The ones that got in, but once they graduated, something changed. Now they were, as my mother used to call it, now they're big shots. Now they're doctors. They're at the top of the world. And that's another group that can end up being very proud and very arrogant. And most often they don't deserve it because they got into medical school, yes, and they graduated. Usually they're not very creative or insightful or perceptive or anything. So I have no illusions about doctors. I've known a lot of them, but they can be very helpful and they can be good in their field. No doubt about it. So beware of recently graduated medical students. They're dangerous. One Sufi said, humility is to restrain the eyes from looking. Okay, we're back to kind of Islamic principles, restraining the eyes. So, especially, it's getting better now. It's getting cold in Canada. But in the summer, women, for men anyway, women walk around in various states of undress, and it's difficult not to look. You're tempted naturally to look. So humility is not to look. Okay, that's what from Tirmidhi saying that the man of humility, and here he explains why, is he in whom the fires of lust or any attraction to pleasure have been extinguished and the smoke of his breast abated. In other words, his desire body is abated while the light of glorification has dawned in his heart. So he's not looking anymore to be turned on. Okay? Because turned on is having lustful ideas, and so therefore his humility is to not go with the turn on, not go with the desire, not go with the pleasure, but to glorify his Lord. Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. Okay. I hate the way they use Allahu Akbar in these extremist terrorist situations, but I think the journalists take advantage of it, because Allahu Akbar just means Allah is greater than anything else. So it's not an occasion to brag about what you've done, even if it's some feat of war or anything. Allahu Akbar is designed not to praise yourself or the situation or what you did, but to praise Allah. Because Allah is great and you are not. You're just an ordinary human being. So humility in this context, the author is saying, is staying away from satisfying your pleasures. Okay, so it becomes a little bit like asceticism, ashod. We'll talk about asceticism in a later video. Fudayl bin Iyad, another great Sufi, we're just taking the quotes and commenting on them, said that he used to hate to see a man behaving as if he had a humility greater than what was actually in his heart. That's what we were talking about the imam and the muezzin and the muqaddam of the sheikh. They're pretending to have more humility than they have. Also, Suleiman al-Darani, another Sufi, said, if all the people were to gather to humble me as I am humbled when I am alone, they would not be able to do it. Okay, so he was able to be humble on his own. Most often, the way we get to humility is by Allah testing us. He sends us something, an illness, an accident, financial problem, or nowadays especially a relationship problem, and we thought we could fix it. We thought we could, whether we're men or women, we thought we could make this relationship work, and we can't. It's almost arrogance to think we can, and we can't. So that induces humility. As I'm talking about that, I'm thinking of some other very prideful people that we have around us nowadays. By the way, one of the great sources of pride in the modern world is science. oh, we have this great science. We can travel now at 500 miles an hour, 400 miles an hour in an airplane. Isn't it great? We now have this new chemotherapy treatment, that we can cure, sort of, extend the lifespan of the person with this cancer. We have this wonderful cure. Yeah, but what about the cancer? Where did that come from? Well, if you do a little research and backtrack, the vast majority of cancer comes from science, from the chemicals we developed and the construction products we developed and all of this stuff and the technology and now the EMFs that are everywhere. That's what's driving the cancer. So what's the cost-benefit ratio here? It's a very good question. I would say the cost-benefit ratio of science is now in the negative. More cost than benefit. My brother was telling me in one of our meetings that my great-grandfather lived to 105 and died, this is in Russia, and died because he was shot during some war battle situation. And his father before him, so that would be my great-great-grandfather, lived to 115. So if you survived the infectious diseases of childhood in those days, you could live even longer. But now, with our wonderful science, we have all these toxins in our environment, chemicals and heavy metals and EMFs and VOCs that cause us to have cancer, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinsonism, etc., etc. That's our wonderful science that we're so proud of, and we shouldn't be. Okay, so that's another source of pride. Umar bin Abdulaziz, not known too well, but he was actually one of the few very righteous caliphs. Because a lot of the caliphs after the Caliph Rashidun, after the rightly guided caliphs, many of them were corrupt, whether they from the Umayyads or the Abbasids. But Umar ibn Abdulaziz, had you ever heard of him, Hadi? It's not that well known a personality, but he was a great caliph. Was writing something one night while he had a guest with him. The lamp had almost gone out. The guest said, I will climb up to the lamp and put it right. Omar said, no, it's not hospitality that a guest should be put to work. Okay, sometimes we get into, I would call this exaggerated humility or exaggerated adab. Okay, so that's also a danger. If you become an extremist of humility, you may end up with a pride in your humility. So I wouldn't recommend that. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri related that the Messenger of Allah, that's probably one of the companions, used to feed his donkey. Okay, so our prophet was a man of humility. He wasn't arrogant like the pharaohs and the the leaders of countries tend to be. He was a humble man. He used to, but not so humble that he didn't recognize his own qualities. Because in one of the famous riwayat, he was telling the men that the best of you are the ones who are kindest and best to their families, and I, myself, am the best to my family, of all of you. Okay, so it wasn't a false pride. It's okay to recognize your qualities, just don't, in the words of my mother, just don't become a big shot. Okay. He used to feed his donkey, sweep the house, bend his sandals, I wonder where he learned that, patch his clothes, and milk the ewe, the sheep. Okay, so he had, in other words, he had no pretensions. Okay, okay, this is an occasion, I think we'll finish on this note and continue next. This is a big subject, I can see. We have a lot to say about it. But I may have told this elsewhere. When my last sheikh was from Tunisia, in the south, but we couldn't stay there for political reasons, so We stayed in the north in Tunis, and I decided one winter I would stay there for the winter. So I started looking for an apartment. And in Tunisia, they don't seem to hide their pretentiousness sometimes. So in the announcement for the apartment, it said appartement haut statut. This is a high status apartment. I don't think anyone in North America would advertise it that way.
They do now.
They do that?
Yeah.
Okay, high status apartment. So I said, okay. It seemed to be in the area close to my Arabic school, and I said, okay, let me try it. So I called up and I announced myself as a Canadian doctor. I'm sure she didn't think I'd look like this. And so I came to visit the house, and I noticed that the door was closed and there was a window upstairs. The lady opened up the shutters, saw who I was. I was dressed in my usual Sunnah clothing, not with the thawb, but my usual Sunnah clothing. She shut the window, shut the shutters. I wouldn't even open the door. I wasn't high status enough for her. I wasn't what she was looking for. She was looking for some Canadian doctor in a suit and tie, like maybe a Sanjay Gupta type, although she wouldn't have liked him either because he's Indian. But anyway, so this is the kind of pretentiousness you can find in certain societies, and our way rejects all this, and we try to find an appropriate level of humility. We ask Allah to help defend ourselves against our own inner pride,
Ameen.
and to acknowledge our station, because our station is one of lowliness, really. Our reality, no matter how good we are at sports or literature or mathematics, we're still a lowly creature. One fell swoop, one wrong move from a car when we're a pedestrian, and we're gone. One nasty microbe like the flesh-eating streptococcus, and we're dead, or we're multiple amputated. So we're very weak, and Allah tells us that. May Allah help us to accept our weakness and to acknowledge His strength, His wisdom,
Ameen.
and glorify Him,
Ameen.
and in that way to be in the right state. That's the highest state for us, is the state of submission and obedience.
Ameen.
Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Al-Fatiha.